Meeting of the Council of the Municipality of Dutton Dunwich for May 24th, 2023. We have a busy agenda, so we'll try and keep it on track here. Clerk Tara will open the meeting.
Moved by Dreyfus, seconded by Drewler, that the meeting of the Council of the Municipality of Dutton Dunwich opens at 5:00 p.m. All in favor? And that's carried.
Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest? I see none. Council was forwarded a copy of the draft minutes from the previous meeting. Are there any amendments to the minutes? I see none. The minutes of the previous meeting will be approved as presented to council. Clerk Tara, are there any items not on the agenda?
I don't have any items.
Thank you. The next thing is we have a very pleasant task ahead of us, and Colin Schul, Fire Chief Colin Schul, I'll call you up to make a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate the opportunity to bring this individual forward to council's attention as well as municipality of Dutton Dunwich for a stellar career. 31 years, worked his way through the ranks and has been nothing but a stellar deputy to myself in the 2 years that I've gotten to know him. And I just want to extend my sincere thanks to Deputy Chief Kevin Hull, and basically bring it to the attention of council that Kevin's intention is to retire on May 31st after a 31-year career with Dutton Dunwich Fire. Kevin has seen numerous incidents in Dutton Dunwich. He's also seen the fire department grow in a positive manner, become a busier fire department than it's probably ever been. And also, we have a number of members here to show the support for Deputy Chief Hull, and I would want to send my sincere congratulations to Kevin, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Kevin's wife and his family for supporting him through the 31 years of hearing that pager go off 24 hours a day. So I will throw it over to Kevin, unless the mayor would like to say something before Kevin. And again, I want to say congratulations to Deputy Chief Kevin Hull for a stellar career of 31 years. And I'm sure he'll have a longer retirement than that. So well, here's fingers crossed. But I know that he will miss the fire department, but I know that Kevin will keep in touch, and we will be seeing Kevin around with some of our community events, and we want him to stay involved as well. So congratulations, Kevin. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for that, Kevin. The microphone's yours if you so wish.
I obviously didn't prepare anything, and Chief told me not to cry, so I'm going to try not to. But I told him it's more a matter of dementia than it is sentiment. But I would like to thank all of the members of the fire department for coming up here today. 31 years ago, if you'd have told me I was going to be sitting here today, I'd have said you were crazy, because I didn't see it probably going more than 10 years. I did start a little bit later. Fire prevention night over at the community center, and my cousin convinced me to sign up and give it a try, and it's been quite a ride. We've got a great group now. You've got a great chief, got a great great group of officers and firefighters. The new recruits are really stellar. They're getting great training, and they're going to serve the department well for years to come. I'd like to thank everybody here for your support. Thank you, Chief. for your support. He's been fantastic to work with. When I started, it was actually Gilbert Bow who was chief. And then there's been a few since. Dan Lundy was the chief that promoted me to deputy chief, and then Chief Schul after that. So it's been good. I'm going to miss a lot of it. I'm certainly not going to miss the 3 a.m. pager. I've had enough of getting out of bed, all through the night, and having these guys really do give up a lot, because it doesn't matter what time of day or night it is, and no matter what you've got planned, when the pager goes off, these guys go. So they give up a lot. So please keep giving them all your support. Again, thank you very much. And
Um, Yeah. Thank you for your service, 31 years above and beyond the call of duty. And this council does support our firefighters, and we will continue to do that. And I think it's a testament to your character, Kevin, the participation here tonight. The people want to come out and thank you. And I'm going to open it up. Councillor Doulard may want to say a few words. She's our representative to the fire department.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Gee, I wasn't expecting to say anything, but Kevin and I have had lots of chats since I became the fire representative, and the knowledge that he has imparted to the team and the team that he works with, fantastic, and just selfless giving to our community. It's so appreciated. Now, enjoy those grandchildren.
Any other comments from council? They appreciate your work, Kevin. We're going to have a quick photo op out in the hall, and please, we'd like to get everybody in there, all your comrades. Okay. Thanks for bearing with us. These things are very important in a small community. The next item is Watson and Associates Economists Limited Development Charge Study. We have Daryl Abbs with us, and he's going to teach us. Take it away, Daryl.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Pull this closer. And thank you to council for having me here this evening. Tonight, I'm just going to go over a little bit of an overview of what development charges are and how you can use them within your municipality, and just give you a little bit of the background and some of the useful components of the development charge, how it works, and some of the restrictions on that have recently been put into place through recent legislative changes at the province. So if we could jump to the next slide, please. Just a little agenda. So start off with a little bit of that overview, talk about kind of the recent legislative changes through Bill 23, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. I'm pretty sure everyone is aware of this. And then some of the potential services you could actually include if you were to impose a development charge bylaw. I noted emerging issues on there on the agenda, but instead I kind of revised the presentation a bit to talk about what the other municipalities in the county are doing with development charges. And then happy to open it up to questions. If you'd prefer, as I go through to ask questions, I'm okay with that too, whatever you prefer. So if we could jump to the next slide after that one, please. So development charges, what are they? They're really a municipal revenue tool for municipalities to recover the capital costs associated with growth, right? So if we have new residential or non-residential development coming to the municipality, you might have to build new roads, you might have to build water mains, sewer mains to accommodate that new development. And so development charges are to recover those costs from that new development. So these costs are in addition to what the developer would normally be required to build as part of their subdivision. So you can think of a traditional subdivision, you have internal roads. Under those roads, you can have water mains, sewer mains, street lights, sidewalks. All of those things would be constructed by a developer. And they would pay for those. Then the municipality would assume that after the subdivision is complete. These would be the additional capital costs required to connect those developments to the existing road network or water, wastewater network, et cetera. Okay. Typically, developers would pay these charges at the time of building permit. So when they go pull their permit as part of the application, there's a development charge fee and they would pay that prior to receiving that building permit. Okay. And then municipalities are empowered to impose these charges through the Development Charges Act. So on the next slide, I just wanted to kind of put into perspective where development charges fall in the overall municipal planning framework, right? So we'll start off with the official plan. You're going to identify all the overarching policies, where the developments can be. Let's say in Dutton, for example, you might have the urban area and you are going to identify all the lands to be developed, what type of development they are. And so from there, once you know where the development could be and how much, you can then identify what those capital needs are. So you may undertake master plans to identify all the water, wastewater, road infrastructure required to accommodate that development, or staff might undertake that analysis on their own. But either way, you know how much you're going to grow and you know what capital needs to accommodate that growth. And from there, development charges really just take that existing information, do some calculations, put it into the magic box, and then out comes development charges that you can impose on new development to pay for those capital costs. Okay. So on the next slide, just a brief history of development charges. So, these aren't new. They've been around since the 50s. They used to be called lot levies, and they were imposed under the Planning Act. Moved forward to 1989, and that's when they implemented the first Development Charges Act. In 1997, there were some major revisions, refinements, restrictions on what you could collect, and that was kind of the Development Charges Act that we've been using ever since. Now, off to the right, we wanted to show you how busy the province has been, and they've made a number of revisions to the Development Charges Act over the last few years. I won't get into all of them, but some of them relate to the timing of payments for certain types of developments, some exemptions, et cetera. But I will talk about Bill 23, which is the most recent change. Next slide, please. So the Development Charges Act lists a number of eligible services. So when we're talking about what capital costs we need to recover to accommodate development, there's a specific list of services you can collect for. Now, I won't go through all of them. They're on the screen there. But generally, you can think of water, wastewater, roads, parks and recreation, fire. Those are the kind of predominant services that most municipalities would recover for. Okay, and at the end of the presentation, I just went through your financial information return, identified the services for which you have expenses that you might be able to implement a development charge for. So the definition of capital costs, so what is a capital cost that I could recover for? That's set out in the legislation. And so you can acquire land or an interest in land. You can improve the land, so this might be, site works, landscaping, etc. That can be included in the cost. You can acquire, lease, construct, or build a facility or structure. So traditionally, municipalities would, you need a recreation center or community center, you're going to build it, right? And then so you can recover costs to build that facility. But increasingly, municipalities are leasing facilities or maybe just purchasing existing facilities to operate their services because it's a cheaper alternative. You can collect for the capital component of the lease or the acquiring that facility. Equipment and rolling stock really is, your major equipment. So maybe it's large mowers, vehicles. So it could be fire vehicles, public works vehicles, major equipment and vehicles that you would utilize to operate these services. You could collect DCs to purchase new ones to expand the fleet or expand the service. And then as well, circulation materials for libraries are also noted in the Act. You'll see that I've crossed out studies, including the development charge background study, which is an unfortunate change resulting from Bill 23. But previously studies were eligible. So if you were doing master plans or any other type of large studies related to these services, you could include them. Unfortunately, that's been removed. And then as well, any interest. If you need to go out, you need to borrow. Obviously, a facility is very expensive. If you needed to borrow to pay for that facility, you can include the cost of the facility as well as the interest costs for the loan. So when we're looking at what capital costs we need to accommodate the new development, we can use any time horizon. So if we want to look at growth over the next 5 years, let's say that aligns with the capital budget per se. Or let's say you've done a master plan and your capital needs for 10, 20 years. We can look at it at any time horizon that you have capital needs identified to undertake the calculations. Any capital costs that we do identify need to be reduced by any grants, subsidies, or other contributions you might get. And then one of the things, and maybe I'll just summarize it because this third bullet's very wordy and it's kind of, you may include authorized costs incurred or proposed to be incurred by others on behalf of the municipality. Really what that means is if another municipality or let's say a board, for example, imposes a charge, growth-related capital charge. So this could be the secondary water system. Might impose a capital charge on the municipality for growth-related assets. You can then turn around and include that in your development charge calculation to recover that from growth. And then you can remit that to the board. So it really says you don't have to be the one incurring the cost, but as long as you're paying towards that capital component, then you can recover the costs. Okay. There are restrictions in the definition of capital costs. So one of them is parkland acquisition. So you can't purchase parkland, but you can develop it with development charges. So that's because the Planning Act allows you to recover parkland dedication through the Planning Act there. Vehicles and equipment, they have to have a useful life of at least 7 years or more. This is because historically some municipalities were putting in, hammers and nails and everything they could think of into the development charge so they could recover the cost for it. And then the province said, no, look, they have to be substantial assets, major equipment, vehicles, etc. So they can't be those kind of lower order things. Computer equipment is kind of an interesting one. You can think when the Development Charges Act came into place, even in 1997, computers played a bit of, a different role in our lives than they do today. And so computer equipment was always kind of excluded from the capital costs. However, if it's integral to providing the service, you can include it. So for example, police have laptops in their vehicles. It's integral for them to have those laptops. You can actually include recovery of those capital costs. You can think of water, wastewater treatment facilities. They use SCADA computer systems to operate the facility. Maybe previously they used some pulleys and levers and wheels. Now they're using computers. That's integral, so we can include the cost for those things. Okay, and then as I mentioned, studies have now been removed. So as we go through the development charge process, if you were to move forward, you would identify all these capital costs to, to accommodate the new development. But one of the things the Development Charge Act says we have to do is we have to do this service standard calculation. Okay, and so it's different than, let's say, a service level you might have of 7 acres of parkland for every 1,000 people. What this is a mathematical calculation to really put an upper limit on what we can include in a development charge calculation. So it limits what we can include based on historical provisions. So two of the things we have to look at is a measure of quantity and quality level of service on what you've provided over the last 15 years. So on the next slide, kind of have an example here. And so what you have to do, and apologies for the size there, but what we have to do is we have to go back 15 years and in every year identify the quantity or the inventory of the assets. So in this example, we're looking at fire stations. So we're identifying the square feet of fire stations historically all the way back 15 years every single year. Okay? That kind of gives us the quantity measure of service. The quality is at the end, we identify what's the replacement cost. So if we had to go build that facility today, what would it cost us? And that's really the quality level of service you're providing. If we jump to the next slide, what we do is we kind of multiply those two numbers together, and it really just gives you that replacement value of each of those facilities in each of the years. So we can have a total replacement value of fire stations in this example. What we then do is we divide it by the population in every year, and we get this per capita standard. So if we look at the last number, it says $394.23 per capita. That's really what you've invested, and this is just an example, per capita, right? So what the legislation says is, well, we have to take the average over the last 15 years, and if the average is $567 per capita, that's really what you've invested historically. So if we actually go back one slide, what we do with the calculation is we say at the bottom, if you're going to grow by 8,000 people, for example, and historically you've spent $567 per person, if you multiply those two things together, because that's what we're going to spend going forward, then that upper limit is $4.54 million. So when we go and we say, well, we need to expand the existing fire station, or we need a new fire station, we need vehicles, etc., we're kind of stuck at this cap. We can't include any more than that $4.54 million. Okay. As well, when we're looking at those capital needs, what do we need to accommodate this new development? One of the things we have to look at and identify is a local service policy. So as I mentioned at the beginning, DCs are used for what's in addition to what the developer would construct. What this policy does is it identifies that explicitly. So what is the developer's responsibility? Everything below that they'll pay for. Anything above that would go into the development charge calculation. Okay, and this is a requirement due to some changes in the legislation in 2016 that basically says you can't just require them to do more than really what they're supposed to be providing. And so we'd identify the different levels for roads, for intersection improvements, streetlights. You kind of go through each of those examples and identify what the developer would normally have to do, and that would be the local service. Everything else we can include in the charge. And so on the next slide, what we've done is just show this in a schematic form. And really this is just an example. So, potentially for water mains, maybe those mains inside of the subdivision would be the developer's responsibility. But maybe even if you got into the situation, maybe there's a linkage. So maybe they need to link their road to the existing road network. So should that be the responsibility of that specific developer, or should all the development contribute through development charges? Those are the kind of policy matters to go through and lay out in this local service policy. Okay. So when we're looking at calculating development charge, we've simplified it here to 6 steps. Obviously, the Development Charges Act is something like 60 or 70 different clauses, and there's been years of OMB, OLT cases that kind of guide the methodology and how these things are calculated. But to kind of boil it down to a few steps, the first thing we need to do is we need to identify the amount, type, and location of growth, right? And so essentially, you've done that as part of the official plan. It gets kind of laid out a little more explicitly through a development charge study to say, well, if we're going to grow by, let's say, X hectares of residential development, how much of that is low density, so single detached homes, how much is townhomes, how much of that is apartments, and if for non-residential, how much is industrial, commercial, etc. So once we know where we're growing and how we're growing and by how much, we need to identify the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. So if we have 10,000 new people coming to the municipality, we know we need additional recreation services. Item 3 on the list there says, well, what's the specific capital cost to accommodate that need? So if we know recreation services is a need, do we meet that need with a community center, arena, a pool, etc.? So what are those specific capital costs? So once we've identified all those capital costs, we need to make some deductions because we can't assume all of that is growth related and to be paid for by development. We need to reduce any amounts for grants, subsidies, or other contributions. We need to reduce any share of the projects that might benefit existing development. So for example, if we had an existing fire station and it was 5,000 square feet, if we wanted to knock that down and build a 10,000 square foot fire station, the existing community really gets the benefit of the first 5,000 square feet because you already had that. So potentially only 50% of that project can be funded by developers. The other 50% would be funded by the municipality. Okay. Any amounts in excess of that historical service standard calculation, that would have to be reduced as well. And then if you had any balances in the DC reserve funds, those work into the calculations as well. So once we've identified those capital costs, we've made all the reductions we've had to, we come down with a net growth related cost to be recovered from new development. We then split that between residential and non-residential benefit, and then divide it by the growth in each of those categories to come up with the charge. So on the next slide, I'd just like to add some pictures for fun. We see that we just take that total cost to accommodate the growth, divide it by the growth very simply, and we get that development charge per unit for residential developments and development charge per square foot for non-residential developments. And on the next slide here, we see this little triangle. I'd like to kind of show this triangle because when we're looking at servicing new growth, if we need to build new infrastructure to accommodate that growth, the money has to come from somewhere, right? And so you can use development charges to the extent that the capital costs are related to growth. But if you don't use development charges, then they come from rates if they're water and wastewater, or taxes if it's all the other services, right? So now I just wanted to undertake a quick overview of the changes to the Development Charges Act as a result of Bill 23. And then just kind of summarize those changes so that kind of makes sense in the grand scheme of the rest of the presentation here. So what the province did in passing this piece of legislation on November 28th last year is really reduce the municipality's ability to collect development charges. So whatever we could collect historically from development charges, that's now been reduced due to a number of exemptions and discounts. They've also made changes to community benefit charges, which is really for high density, as well as parkland dedication. They've reduced your ability to collect land through parkland dedication. So on the next slide here, what I wanted to do is just summarize the exemptions that from the development charges that the province has put in place and really separate them into 2 different buckets, those that are in force right now and those that are not in force yet. Because I think it's good to make that distinction because I think what we hear from the province is that the main impetus for this piece of legislation is for affordable and attainable housing. But what we see is the exemptions for those units are not in force yet. So the definition of what's affordable is actually will be defined by this new bulletin. And it's defined as any rental unit or purchased unit that's 80% or less of the market average. And so that average will be defined by this bulletin put out by the municipal affairs. However, what we've seen and observed is there's going to be a lot of challenges with identifying land values or property values and what is 80% of the average value. Is it average value across the county, the municipality? Even within the municipality, there's going to be a wide range of values. So I don't know if they've specifically figured that out yet. And I know they're working on it and trying to determine how they're going to come up with this average market value. Because in our presentation to the province, we kind of threw up these flags and said, well, this not only does it need to be very specific within all the municipalities of all the province, it needs to be updated frequently because as we can see, the values are going to change over time very frequently. So they're working on it is what we hear. And hopefully they'll have something released and circulated soon. In terms of attainable housing, again, this isn't defined. They say it's affordable, or sorry, it's not affordable, but it's attainable. And the definition will be released at a later date. So I don't have more information on that, but hopefully I will at some point. Now, with those units, actually, the municipality has to enter into an agreement with the developer, builder, or whomever to ensure that those would remain affordable or attainable for 25 years. So administratively, kind of a burden, but that kind of gives you some kind of relief that it's not someone who's just going to develop something and then convert it afterwards. So it has to remain affordable, otherwise the development charge is payable. For those exemptions that are in force, if you require any affordable housing through inclusionary zoning, any nonprofit housing is exempt from development charges, and then this additional unit exemption. So for accessory units or apartments, let's say basement apartments, if you have a single, a semi, or row house or townhouse, you can have up to 2 apartments on your property and you wouldn't have to pay a DC. So you can have 2 in the basement, you can have 1 in the basement, 1 on a garage, and you wouldn't have to pay that development charge. Okay. So with respect to the discounts, they've added a new discount for rental housing. So if you have 3 bedrooms or more, you have a discount of 25% on each of those units that are 3 bedrooms or more. 2 bedrooms, 20% discount, and 1 bedroom or less, 15% discount off the DCs. There are a number of other changes that result in some revenue reduction for municipalities, so it wouldn't necessarily affect this municipality, but removal of housing, social housing as an eligible service. As I mentioned earlier, they've removed studies as being an eligible capital cost, and they've actually set up the ability to remove land as an eligible capital cost, although they haven't prescribed any services for which that would be removed yet. There's a mandatory phase-in of the charges. So first year, whatever you calculate, you can only impose 80% of that charge. Then the next year, 85%, 90, 95, then 100 after 5 years. And then as well, that historical level of service calculation we looked at, we used to only have to look back 10 years. That was extended to 15 years. In terms of administrative burden on municipalities or administrative changes for municipalities, there is a maximum interest rate clause in the Development Charges Act. So certain types of developments have their rate frozen earlier in the process, and certain types actually get to pay their DC and installment payments. So rental housing and institutional developments pay over 6 years. 5 years, 6 installment payments. So you can impose interest on those payments, but now it's capped at a maximum. Previously, there was no maximum. There's a requirement to allocate monies in the reserve funds. I think you might have heard from the province that municipalities are sitting on a bunch of cash in their development charge reserves. And so one of the changes is, to allocate the beginning balances each year for water, wastewater, and roads to specific projects. You don't have to spend it, you just have to say that it's going to specific projects. Okay. And then DC bylaws used to be good for 5 years. Now they have a life of 10 years. Now, in terms of exemptions and policies, council does have the discretion to add exemptions onto the development charge bylaw. Now, there are mandatory exemptions through the act, and tried to separate them between kind of what was there before Bill 23 and then what changed as a result of Bill 23. You can see most of it changed as a result of Bill 23. So upper tier, lower tier governments and school boards don't charge each other development charges. So if the county builds a facility and you had a development charge, you wouldn't impose a charge on them, and vice versa. Same thing with school boards. If you're an industrial building, you can expand your structure up to 50% and you don't have to pay any development charges. Anything above that, you would be subject to development charges. And they recently added this a couple years ago, just exemptions for universities. And I kind of went through all these other exemptions and discounts, so I won't repeat myself, but just to note, for apartments, there's also an additional unit exemption. You can add one additional unit in an apartment building. You don't have to pay a DC. So in terms of discretionary exemptions, I mentioned council has the ability to reduce in whole or in part any development charge for any class or type of development. So for example, and I kind of at the bottom there in those circles, we have the most common exemptions. So places of worship and bona fide farms being the most common exemptions across the province. Industrial is pretty common as well. And then, if you have a specific downtown or BIA that you want to specifically incentivize, you might not want to charge them. Any brownfield redevelopments or hospitals are those pretty common ones. You can phase in the charge over time at a different rate. So if you were to implement your first development charge bylaw, you might think, well, even 80% of the charge is still way higher than zero. So you do have the ability to say, okay, well, maybe we only want to implement 25%, then 50, and then work it up to the 100% over time at any rate you'd like, as long as it's below what that mandatory phase-in requirement is. And then there are redevelopment credits. So you do have to recognize any existing dwelling that might be knocked down. So if I had a single detached home, I knock it down, I build 3 townhouses, my development charge payable is 3 townhouses less 1 single detached home. So you do get credit if there's a building there. In terms of other matters for consideration, there is clauses in the Development Charge Act which speak to kind of cross subsidization. So you can't say, well, I don't want to charge non-residential, so I'm going to put all those costs on the residential guys and have them pay for it. So you're not allowed to do that. So we have to undertake the calculation, come up with the costs associated with each type of development, and then any exemptions you provide would be funded by the municipality. A background study is required to be prepared. So as part of a development charge process before a bylaw is passed, a background study has to be released to the public at least 60 days prior to allow for that public consultation period. You have to have a mandatory public meeting to allow the public and council time for questions and discussion before that bylaw gets read for the first time and then subsequently passed. And when the charges are calculated and implemented, the Development Charge Act does allow municipalities to index those charges to try to keep pace with inflation. And that's the StatsCan Non-Residential Building Construction Price Index. Kind of wordy, but what it does is it tracks tender prices. So recently it hasn't been really keeping pace with the increase in tender estimates, but it is generally in the long run does track those tender prices, and it does allow you to try to keep those charges up with inflation. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I took a look at your financial information return just to see what some of those services are that potentially could be included. So fire, police, services related to a highway, which is the term used in the act. It's really roads and public works, parks and recreation services, water, wastewater, and potentially health services. In terms of the development charges in the county, just did a quick survey of what those rates are for a single detached home. So if you were to build a single detached home in each of the municipalities, just providing this little survey of rates. So West Elgin doesn't have development charges, so it'd be 0. Yourselves also 0. South Wall, it'd be $6,200. Now, just noting that that does not include water or wastewater services. So when you compare it to, say, Central Elgin, Elmer, and Bayham, those charges being up in 15,000, 16,000, 14,000, those do include water and wastewater, which is why they're a bit higher. Malahide as well doesn't have a development charge for water or wastewater. They have considered water a couple times, but they're still working on kind of the servicing plan for Springfield. So really that's without water and wastewater. One of the other things we want to look at is not just the quantum of what the development charge is, but how does that relate to home prices? Because, you know, one of the questions is always, is this unaffordable? And so, especially with municipalities looking to impose a development charge bylaw for the first time, I know had this discussions with Bruce County, who's looking at implementing a DEC. Township of Warwick just implemented their first DC bylaw. And so one of the things we looked at is just the development charge as a percentage of the home price. So historically, 15, 20 years ago, development charges used to be about 6 to 8% of an average home price. And as you can see within the county, they're down around 1 to 3%. With the existing charges that are in place for Southwold, Central Elgin, Malahide, Elmer, and Bayham. Okay. Just to put it into perspective, obviously there's other factors as well, not just the quantum, but just so you kind of have a sense of how that relates to the average home price. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions from council. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Daryl. And I'm sure there are questions from council. Deputy Mayor Loveland, you go first.
Okay, Council Pemberton and I were both somewhat involved in the Southwold development charges. And the reason I think there that water and wastewater were not included, it was, they are like we are here, they have connection fees and they were considerably higher than the development charges were going to be. And also considerably less regulations. So I think if we were going to look at something that I'm not sure it's wise to spend a lot of money on studying development charges on water and wastewater, it's easier to stay with the connection fees. Comment maybe.
Anything further from council? Councilor Dreyfus.
You made reference to the official plan or master plan, which seems to really dictate the outcome of a development charge. So I guess the question, we have an official plan. Do we have a master plan that is extended out 10? Is there benefit to extending it out further? Because we're a small municipality. I guess my question is we're a small municipality with limited growth potential. So I'm just wondering in our municipality, what the impact would be. Is there a study we could go to that would give us any more information or knowledge on that? So.
We have no master plans at all, but I think, like you say, with our size, I think we could probably, with the help of whoever's doing our development chart study, like Watson or something, that could be an in-house study because it's, like you say, we have limited growth potential. So yeah, but we don't have any master plans sitting on the shelf or anything like that, but except for wastewater, which we probably wouldn't consider anyway, so.
Okay, anything further? Councilor Pemberton.
Yeah, just curious on typical cost of the DC studies and timing of how long they've taken, so on.
Yeah, so through the mayor, timing wise, so from release of the background study to passage of the bylaw, there has to be at least 2 months. If there's no water or wastewater, studies are usually quicker because those are the most challenging services. So they can be done as quick as 2 months. Typically, they take about 4 months to get to that report stage, just through meetings with staff, confirming the right information, rounding out that capital program to accommodate that development. So I would say probably about 6 to 8 months is a reasonable time frame. In terms of cost, it all depends on the number of services, the number of meetings, if you wanted stakeholder engagement, extra council workshops, etc. But generally, they range, anywhere from 20 to 35,000 generally, depending on the services. But if you have less services, no water, wastewater, there's not as many meetings, then it can be done for less.
Anything further from council? I have one question, and this has been before council before. Do we or don't we development charges? And the thought was always, we're going to scare away developers. In your expert opinion, would you comment on that?
Yeah, so what we've seen and through undertaking these studies all across Ontario, I think our firm undertakes about 50% of the development charge studies in Ontario, and we also undertake development charge studies across the country. What we see is actually the municipalities with the highest DCs have the highest growth or highest development and activity in development. We haven't really seen a case where imposing development charges is really stifling growth, especially on the residential side. Municipalities with challenges on the non-residential side tend to maybe put in some exemptions or some discounts in place to accommodate that. But in our experience, we haven't seen that. And actually, through competitiveness studies our firm has done, what we've heard from industry is actually especially non-residential industrial industry, they're more concerned with the ongoing operating costs, water, wastewater rates, electricity costs, taxes, than they are with one-time capital costs. So it all depends on the very local circumstances, but in my experience, we have not noticed that.
And just whether other comment, we talked about growth, but relatively speaking, we are experiencing fairly substantial growth because we're a small community, but we just completed a 75 house subdivision. We've got a 90 unit one almost done and quite a bit in the works. So our growth is, comparatively speaking, as big as anybody's around. So just wanted to add that in. Any other comments? Councillor Dreyfus.
Just one more question here. I'm looking at the development charges per municipality, noting that Bayham is like 14,000 per house. What would be the significance of an increase? Like, why are they higher than let's say a Southold or a Malahide, for example?
Yeah, so through the mayor, so partially it's the water and wastewater, the large component between the difference between Bayham and Malahide and Southwold there. But the differences really are in terms of that local service policy, so what's required of the developers. Some municipalities have a higher bar. So I know one municipality out towards the city of Hamilton, county out there, they require the developer to actually extend the pipes to every pump station all the way to the treatment plant. Most municipalities don't do that. They say if it's really outside of your subdivision, it goes into the development charge. So they have lower development charges than they could because they require the developer to do more. So it all depends on those local circumstances. That really is a driving factor in what those rates are.
Is it fair to say that we could have a made in Dutton Dunwich development charge policy with exclusions for water, wastewater, even certain areas of the town, like our downtown desperately needs help. So we could exclude certain areas as well. So we could tailor make it to Dutton Dunwich. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct. You could tailor make the charges, you can provide those exemptions and discounts to those areas or industries that you would like to. And really make sure that, if you're really only interested in imposing the charge, let's say for certain services, like maybe it's parks and recreation services, you have significant costs coming up, or fire services, by looking at the amount of development. I mean, just those two subdivisions you mentioned, if we're assuming 3 persons per unit, that's almost 300 people in 2 subdivisions, right? And so if you start planning 10 years, 20 years, and you start thinking, well, based on all those lands, how much, population could come here, and it doesn't have to be exactly 20 years, but to accommodate that population, we're going to need an expansion of a community center, or we're going to need to develop new parkland to accommodate those new residents. You can include that in the development charge calculation, and now you can impose that, and it could be a place for 10 years before you have to revisit it. So yes, you could have it very tailored to your own circumstances.
Thank you. And I liked your example of the fire department, because we're faced with that as well. We were just buying a new fire truck and we had to fit the truck into our existing building. So those are the challenges we've got. We will need a new fire hall at some point in the future. So all of them problems are we're faced with right now. Wastewater treatment plant, we're up against the wall on that one. So if there's no further questions from council or comments, thank you for your presentation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone did here. And we have a decision to make. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
A lot to digest. But is that, everybody felt they got the information they needed to make an informed decision? We're not making that tonight. I'll just wait a few minutes until Tracy. Mark and Valerie, you're up next. Come forward. Just wait until Councillor Drulard gets back.
But you're not collecting for them though. They're tapping into your service, but you're not collecting for it.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. That was well worth the time. Next on the agenda, we have Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority. We have Mark and Valerie with us, and they're going to talk about the service agreement proposed for Dutton Dunwich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
I'd like to recognize our member. Councillor Loveland is the member on the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority, and you have big shoes to fill, given that Mayor Hance was your predecessor. So thank you very much, Council and Mayor, for inviting us tonight. And it's the continuing story of bills, be it Bill 23 or Bill 229, that has affected both the conservation authorities and municipalities over the last 2 or 3 years. So the next slide. So as of February of last year, we had to produce an inventory of our programs and services. So what that is a list of everything we do, and we have to categorize it. And I know there's a couple of councils that probably weren't part of this discussion we've had over the last couple of years. So hopefully I can give you an idea of what that's all about. And this list, this inventory of all our services and how we provide them and what they cost is a living document. So we have to keep it alive as we go forward. We try to keep it up as much, but of course, Bill 23 changed a number of the services we are permitted to provide a municipality. So that changes things. Next. So in this list, we have to categorize the types of services we provide. So there's 3 categories. Category 1 is what the province calls mandatory services. So they are not the traditional services that a conservation authority provides. The province says they are, but they aren't. They have a different view of history than I think the rest of the world does on that one. But they are the services that they believe are mandatory across the province. So they're flooding and erosion, the work we do with modeling rivers and channels and streams and lakes and stuff, the work we do on our conservation areas, source water protection, and the accounting and the finance and the administration to make all those things happen. So those are the mandatory services. That's category 1. And then category 2 and 3 are essentially other services other than those. Category 2 is where the municipalities asked us to do something. And category 3 is where the authority working with municipalities have over time developed programs. So category 2 and 3 don't really matter, the difference, because what happens in the end is we need an agreement to allow us to provide, to levy you as a municipality for anything that is not mandatory. So right now, every year you pay the Conservation Authority, this year, $58,000. Out of that, about 9% of it, or 5,600, is non-mandatory. And that includes all the stewardship work we do, all the campgrounds we do, all the education programs we do, all the water quality sampling we do, all those types of things. The reality is most of the non-mandatory things that we do for a municipality is stuff we can generate money on. So our non-mandatory programs are generally very, very small portions paid by levy. So at the Conservation Authority, we do a couple of $1 million of money goes to landowners to do stewardship. And we do probably $100,000 a year in Dutton of stewardship programs across this municipality. But almost all of it comes from grants and from donations and things like that. Very little of it. What we use your money for is if we get a little bit of money from a lot of people, it means that we can afford to apply for those grants. So most of the money in many of the non-mandatory services is actually money self-generated. So we have a budget of, I think out of our budget, we have about 1.7 million, and there are special levies that come from levies, but our budget's $5 million. And where does the rest of that come from? It comes from us applying to Trees Ontario. It comes from us getting money from the federal government to deal with phosphorus and provide money for cover crops. That's where all the rest of that money comes. The important thing is that out of the 1.7 million, it's about 170,000 for all 10 municipalities. That's what is the grease that makes it all happen. Because if we don't have that money, we can't go out and ask for more. So that is the issue with this whole thing. And I'll go on to the next slide. Started going on there. So our budget changes every year, and that's one of the challenges with this. If we get enough grants, we don't use the general levy, but we may need general levy to get us through a point where we aren't getting grants to keep the person that's applying for those grants. So we're forever shifting money back and forward, and that's one of the challenges. When you see this inventory, it's 2022. But the other thing that's happened is COVID-19's changed a lot of things. We've got twice as many people in our conservation areas. Those types of things. We don't necessarily have as much revenue to do it, but we do have some increased revenue to help support that. So there are significant changes occurring continually with our budget. And with things like the province saying we can't do certain things, well, we aren't spending money on that anymore. So that will be a change in our budget at all. So as well. So over the long term, our revenues have changed significantly. Even in our assumptions last year, we assumed a $4.2 million budget. We made 5-some odd million, and it's all grants and revenues that we've been able to pull in. So the next slide, one of the things that we did do, and we have decided we are not going to use surpluses from these other programs to back fund the mandatory programs of the Conservation Authority. We use the surplus. If we have a surplus in stewardship, we use that in stewardship. We limit our levy in that area by using whatever surpluses we can provide. And once again, it's our non-mandatory, like our campgrounds. They make money. They pay for the rest of the day use people in that conservation area. So we don't have to use, even though the day use is called mandatory, but the camping actually pays for the day use. So those are the types of things that we have. Next. So out of what we bring in as a budget, there's a number of things. So we generate huge amounts of money through self-generation, but the key to make it happen is this levy from municipalities. And then we do get some money from the province. Out of our $5 million, we get 80,000 for a Section 39, and we get, I think it's 24,000 for our museum. So it's not a huge amount. So every time they threaten us with cutting us more, it's not, every time they do it, it's less of a worry. So then the next slide shows you what this inventory looks like. And so you'll see that it's our accounts. So we went right through our chart of accounts, pulled out every account, and we've broken it up in the themes that the province wishes us. And this is all mandatory work, no funding, by the way, to do this. Mandatory work from the province to restate, and we are having to restate all our financials and everything because of this work. And we go through and we tell you exactly what category it is, where the money comes from to fund that category. And even in our mandatory services, some of them, like we have generation of 40% of, and we are always trying to generate enough money to limit the levy increases. And one of the other things I think that's important to note is in the last 5 years, our levy increase has been about 15%. And that's including the increase on the increase as we increase. And we are the lowest in southwestern Ontario. We're actually almost half the next lowest conservation authority. So we've taken it very seriously that we are responsible to you and to ratepayers in the way we levy our municipalities. So what are we doing with this agreement? So the background of it, the meat that sort of explains it all is this inventory. And you got that last February, but I'm sure nobody's going to read this. It's a lot to go through. But what are we going to do with it? Next slide. So we have to sign an agreement for those category 2 and 3 services. And what we're asking is that you don't take apart our programs. That you don't say, oh, I don't want to do this little bit here. And the reason is we have 10 municipalities adding, like you provide 3% of our levy. So if another municipality says we don't get 3% for this one service, and somebody else says you won't get 7% for this one service, you can see how our services start falling apart. So what we're asking is that you sign an agreement with us to approve the way we budget and the overall non-mandatory, both category 2 and 3 services. What we've done is we've gone to other conservation authorities, and it's Southwest, the Middlesex, that has 5 conservation authorities. You think you got a problem? They have 5 that they're trying to deal with. So what we've been doing is working across Southwestern Ontario to get the same agreement so that where we have, and there's a number with 2 or 3 conservation authorities, that they're not looking at something very different. So what we've done is we've worked with, and we're using the Asaba Bayfield example. Asaba Bayfield's one of Southwest Middlesex's conservation authorities. And Kettle's using it, slightly different version, Essex, St. Clair, we're all using the same one, and it's still got the same idea, that we ask you to trust us in the way we levy you. I think we have a good track record in it, and we do provide good service and many multipliers on any money you provide. And this agreement basically says, do what you're doing. It's a 5-year agreement. Anytime in that agreement, the municipality can say, whoa, 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 we want to relook at this anytime. And that is part of the agreement as well. So we're looking for a 5-year agreement to allow us to levy you for those non-mandatory programs, which we believe are very good dollar for the money. And the board has approved this. They, next slide, in October of last year, they approved it. Then we had to change it all again because of Bill 23. And then so they've just approved it again in April, and we're now reshipping it out to municipalities once again. And what we're asking is once you review this and we answer the questions that you have, that you would approve this agreement. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mark, for the presentation. Are there any questions from council? You did a good job.
Thank you.
Just one question, and I forget the number, but it was something like 5,000 and something non-mandatory that that
Yeah.
we pay.
Mhm.
What is the multiplier? Like, we put that in, but what does that grow to through your
It,
grants and stuff?
I would say that's probably it depends on the year though, right? It really depends. If we do a big wetland, that's 25,000 just by itself that we would be putting into the municipality. But it's probably a 20 to 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can speak confidently, just drive around this municipality and see all the projects that have your fingerprints on it. We have been very active in our citizens, in conservation and reaching out to you and other people and getting the job done. So we have benefited enormously in Dutton Dunwich from this. So that's just my comments. I think, and I've made the comment before, Lower Thames has the sharpest pencil when it comes to budgeting that I've ever seen. And you've had added costs through Bill 23 and everything, and I don't know, there's not a lot of people in that office, so you must work hard to get something in place, and then, another bill comes through and we gotta rewrite the whole thing, so I wouldn't wanna have to do that, but I give you a lot of credit for what you've done.
That's why I have gray hair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think the other thing I want to say is the Conservation Authority is committed to making this watershed and these communities better. We're not just mandatory programs. A lot of what we do is working with people to do the right things for their children and for their grandchildren and stuff like that. And we are committed, no matter what the province says, we are still committed to these communities to make that happen. So thank you very much.
Any other comments? Councillor Pemberton?
Yeah, thanks, guys. That was a great presentation, and through you, Mayor. For your non-mandatory services, do you have many municipalities using like review for EISs, or if Valerie, building departments receive EISs, is there ever a use for the building departments getting you guys to say, okay, yeah, we've received it, we hand it off to you to review to say, okay, are people actually complying and doing what they're supposed to? Or was there ever thought of adding that type of service?
Mr. Mayor, we have a planning agreement with the municipality that actually provides for that, and we've been doing that for years. Bill 23 prohibits us from reviewing and commenting those things.
Through the plan.
So we are specifically prohibited from, I think, 9 pieces of legislation from even reviewing it, let alone commenting back to the municipality. So, and it's created a huge problem across Ontario. There are places where developers can't develop because there's no consultants, because the Conservation Authority staff that provided for cents on the dollar. You know, our whole natural heritage review per year was about 17,000. And we think it's going to cost like hundreds of thousands for municipalities to go out and buy consultants to do that work. The other thing is most of the data they need is sitting in our office.
Okay, anything further? Thank you very much. Always informative, and it's good to see you, the two of you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm gonna be leaving.
Yep, please.
It's got 2 pages for signing, so you sign, send one back to us.
Will do. We won't pass the bylaw tonight, but it will, depending on council, but I don't think there's an issue. I think it's fair to say that.
I'll make it simple and easy for someone else.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. So we have a copy of the agreement. How does council want to handle that? Does everybody want to go through it, or? You read it? Okay. All right, so I'll leave it up to Tara to bring bylaw forward, and we'll deal with it. Okay, thank you.
There we go. Excellent. Okay. So here to give an update on the Class EA project that Dylan's been working with the municipality on for the wastewater treatment plant. Next slide. So I'll make this actually. I think it might just need an extra click just to make things appear. There we go. Sorry, it's got all kinds of things that slide on there. So I'll take the opportunity to give a bit of a background on where we got and where we are now, just for the benefit of any councillors who haven't been involved through the whole process. To start, the need for the Class EA study was determined. Any Class EA begins with a problem statement, and in our case, we identified the facility's overcapacity, and really to meet the needs of the community in terms of staying in compliance and for future development, there needs to be some form of capacity expansion. Next slide. So one of the first things that we did was to look at existing rated capacity, and then also what we thought development would be within the community. So we've broken development up into two phases. A first phase, which is really anything that we see as being either we have a draft plan of subdivision or something that's reasonably indicating it will be an imminent development. And then phase two is anything that's in your OP as developable land. So you can see we're just about I would say a little bit more than doubling the capacity to get up to phase one, and we're going up by, I'd say, probably a factor of 7 or so to get to phase two. So it's a very big jump. That's part of the reason for the phasing, because it's obviously a lot more money to build up that capacity, and we know we don't have 7 times the population without servicing right now. So it's just a practical way in terms of spreading out the cost. Next slide. And just to visualize, this is a figure that we prepared earlier, just shows roughly what we're talking about in terms of who gets service now versus the overall OP developable land. So you can see the areas in blue are undeveloped parcels that we do think would be requiring servicing, and this was developed with Ken's help and a lot of the municipality's input over the past year or so. Next slide. Again, for the benefit of anybody understanding the Class EA process, right now we're just concluding phase 3 and writing up the phase 4 report for the EA. Phase 2 included the PIC that was held here in last spring, and that will include reviewing design concepts, so essentially the technology that we propose, the costing associated with that, and filling in the details really that go into the ESR report, which is the final deliverable. Next slide. So you could see in terms of completed items, we've identified the problem and opportunity, which is what I went over with at the beginning, completed phase 2 and had the PIC. The phase 3 report, which is in large part the items I'm going to discuss tonight, is essentially written and being reviewed right now. And I expect council will have it within the next couple of weeks. And then in parallel, phase 4 is being written, because really it's kind of a bundling of all those reports together. Next slide. This is just very quickly reviewing what phase 2 was. Every EA has an alternative solution, and in the case of a Schedule C EA, an alternative design concepts phase. The design concept phase is kind of the fun one in terms of what are you actually going to build. The alternative solutions really is how are you going to service your community. So the obvious question is, do you need to do anything at all? Do you tear down the plan to build it somewhere else? Do you tear down the plan to build it the same place, or do you try to expand it? And those were the questions we had. In our case, it's a fairly straightforward answer, because the plant's in good shape. It's just a bit too small. So we identified the alternative of upgrading and expanding the existing facility as being preferred. Next slide. Looking at the alternative design concepts, this is when where the technology review comes in. And really, we were looking at a few options that could ideally build on what's already there. There's a number of different ways of providing wastewater treatment. What we usually focus on for these sorts of EAs is kind of what we call the biological treatment process. So if you see the tanks with the aeration, that's sort of the main central part of the treatment process. That's where you really have decisions to make. Most plants require something to screen the wastewater coming in. They require a control building. They require disinfection at the end, and something to do with biosolids. But we tried to focus things in on that sort of core biological process. So you can see we had a long list here. We pared it down to the 4 that I have in bold. I put an asterisk beside the second bolded item because it really is kind of part and parcel with the first one that's bolded. So we looked at kind of 3 of them, which would be I'd say essentially fixing and enhancing the extended aeration process that we have now. And then looking at adding sort of a moving bed biofilm reactor. It's just basically a solid media floating in your tanks. As a second phase, membrane bioreactor, which some municipalities have and use quite successfully. And then a membrane aerated biofilm reactor, which is a fairly new technology that's just starting to come in from Europe. So we'll go to the next slide. And I guess actually this was just to reiterate what we're looking at for these. And I've mentioned the shortlisted ones on the slide before. The main criteria are really operational performance. I would say that there's no bad process here. There's just ones that are better suited. The key things really for us are how well does it fit on your site? How well does it mesh with what your current operations is used to doing? We don't need to have the most cutting edge process that requires higher certification or just other considerations that we don't really need. We have a sensitive receiver, but we're not up in Lake Simcoe where we need the bleeding edge technology that really would cost that extra money. And it needs to be expandable because we know we're going to have that phasing. So next slide. So I've shown a few figures here. This is just to give a sense of what an upgrade could look like. So you can see this is just a Google Earth image of your plant. Right now the inlet works for the facility are quite rudimentary by modern standards. It's really just actually tucked up right in the middle of that first tank, or in the aeration tank there. So we're showing a new headworks building. It's fairly generously sized in the footprint we have now, but essentially it would be new screens and grit removal that would be in front of that system. In this case, this is the membrane aerated biofilm reactor. It would need to have its own tank. We need a few more items in the control building, which would need an addition, and then the tertiary treatment building new tertiary treatment building would need to be constructed because one of the main bottlenecks that Dylan identified through some earlier work was the sand filters, and because they're essentially dug down into the ground and constructed out of poured concrete, they're very hard to expand. You kind of have to knock down the whole building to make them bigger. So it's easier to put a new tertiary treatment process elsewhere. And we do have UV that can be used a little bit, at least for phase 1. And that's something that we're considering. But really, we probably have that new building. Next slide. This is the MBR, or membrane bioreactor. It requires its own tanks for the actual membrane cassettes to go into. So we're showing that up in the upper left. Same headworks building addition. We don't need the secondary clarifiers because the MBR actually sort of does clarification on its own, but it needs very consistent flow. So we need equalization. So we'd have to use the EQ tank for that. But it does have quite a lot of extra pumps and controls, so we need a new control building. Next slide. And this is actually, I think this one actually is this. Sorry, can you go, did you go back instead of forwards there? Okay. I must have accidentally. Can you go one more? Okay. Seems like maybe I cut a. Did I do something here? Apologies for that. I think I put the same figure in twice, but actually no. The third slide is just mislabeled. Actually, it's and because they're actually quite similar, it isn't the membrane aerated biofilm reactor. This will be essentially the extended air retrofit. So the extended air process, and this is basically the aeration tanks and the clarifiers. If we put that second clarifier back in service and bypass some of the tertiary treatment issues that we have, we can actually squeeze that phase 1 capacity out of the plant. It does need the headworks building. It will need a new tertiary treatment building. And I think I might have accidentally put this figure in twice. So apologies to council here, but it really is quite a similar image, just to give you an idea of the footprint. And then I guess, Tara, if you can just go to the next one. So this is looking at the evaluation, and I'm sure the numbers you're all interested in along the bottom. So what I have here is just a qualitative evaluation of the different options. When we do these EAs, we can do point scoring. I don't really like point scoring because you have to decide which criteria gets which points, and then you end up sort of you introduce your uncertainty in which points you assign as opposed to kind of how you look at things holistically. But really looking at things like ease of operation, ease of operator involvement, and feasibility. These are things that I think I've identified that the extended air process does better in terms of what the existing operators would need to do to run the plant. What we're really talking about is a ballasted clarifier process that would go on the back end. So it's a semi-automated clarifier that comes as a package, but for the rest, you're essentially running the same plant as before. When you start switching to the membrane technologies, it really is a bit more advanced, particularly on the MBR process, just a lot more complicated with things like extra pumps to pull the wastewater through, and troubleshooting is a concern. And also if there's any operator certification issues in terms of, for instance, I don't know if RT is a class 3 or class 4 operator, but you need a class 4 operator for an MBR and you need a class 3 for another one. So it's always something that is worthy of considering. So that's one thing that I thought about as well. Costing shown along the bottom. To be perfectly honest, it's not that big of a spread. I was anticipating it being more when we were looking. And I should caution that this is a range. The way I've set the range is usually when we do these costs, we sort of compile everything at a preliminary level, and I usually add a 30% contingency, which is an estimating contingency. In this case, I'm showing it as a plus and minus. So the 8.3 to 9 million isn't really the real number. That's kind of taking the contingency or subtracting the contingency away. I would say you're probably in kind of the median to upper part of that. So I know it's creeping a bit above the sort of the $10 million ballpark that we were talking about in early 2022, but I'm trying to be as realistic as I can, and I'm carrying some pretty conservative costs when it comes to buildings. So I think there's potentially some ability to look at shaving this cost down as part of the detailed design exercise as required. And just for context, sort of the core technology that's being bought in terms of the equipment is maybe we're talking about maybe $2 million of this. So a lot of it is markups for implementing it. So obviously you have maybe 30-40% that goes into actually constructing whatever you buy, and you add that as a markup. And then anything that's required for the site, so buildings. Obviously there's going to be an engineering budget in there as well, operation or trial operation, financing, things like that. So that's where that cost number comes from, and our report will break out at least a high level where all those numbers come from. So it's clearer to see. Next slide, please. And just looking at the preferred concept. So this is just to summarize the rationale for proposing the extended air upgrade. I would say 99% sure this is what I'm going to say in the final report, but I'll give myself a note for now. But really the points that I see is that it maximizes reuse in the sense that you're using the aeration tanks as they are now. You've got the slightly lower equipment cost, especially for phase 1. And it's a pretty simple process. So really you're looking at something I think in terms of an operation and complexity side is fairly good. One thing I wanted to highlight is that we really looked at phase 1 to some degree in isolation. We can look at potentially mixing and matching. It is such a big jump, particularly if you stick with the extended air option 1 as being the preferred concept. You could revert to something else for the later upgrades if and when you do it. If you buy something like a membrane process, you're sort of committed to running that membrane process. I mean, I guess you could take it out and build something entirely new, but you've sort of committed to doing that for your expansion as well. So it leaves a little bit more flexibility, which is one advantage I'd see. So next steps. as I mentioned, the phase 3 memo is to be released. We have one more consultation point, so we have prepared the text and layout for a mail out. The part that's really the planner on our team is waiting for is the number to put at the bottom and the picture, which are essentially what I've shown you now. That's our last public contact. Any Schedule C Class C requires 2 points of public contact. So one can be the PIC, the second one can be the newsletter. We'll be issuing obviously the ESR, which technically isn't placed on public record until the consultation's done, although council and staff can be reviewing that sort of in parallel to the phase 3 in terms of what it's going to say. And then there's a 30-day review period. We know the MECP wants to do a review of this one. They've notified us already. So it will go to them. But we have been in contact with them. We had a meeting with them regarding the discharge to the creek and what we said the plant would do. And there weren't any red flags raised there, which is really the biggest issue for us in terms of, there wasn't any. We know we don't have species at risk or a major issue when the part we're disturbing, because we're really just digging more where the plant's already been built. Archaeological was the same in terms of it not seeing a main concern, but the biggest issue for me is just making sure they were okay with that municipal drain receiving more flow. So that's all I had. Quite happy to take any questions. I know I went through a lot of material very quickly, but
Any questions or comments from council?
So basically, we're looking at fall for this to be completed. Will that have your design as part of that, or is that afterwards? And I think we have to comment that, the pressure is somewhat off of us since the slowdown in development was probably a good thing for us, but
it's going to come back.
It's going to come back, I think.
Yeah. I'd say, and to say this timeline that we gave was to complete the EA. That being said, I mean, we can look at design and obviously it's at, council and staff's discretion in terms of how that's done. We're not retained for detailed design right now. We're doing kind of the amount of engineering required to get to an answer the EA requires of us, which is enough cost information to be able to differentiate and provide you with a bit of value that way, and obviously some drawings to go with the report. But it's something that Dylan or however you'd wish to move forward with the detailed design can do. And then obviously timelines for the construction are kind of set based on when that's put out and things like lead times for equipment and that sort of thing. So there's definitely abilities to accelerate timelines for design and construction based on pre-purchasing and things like that if you need to. But that's something that we need to discuss.
Anything else from council? Councilor Pemberton.
Yeah, your numbers for your estimated cost, was that for total build out of both expansions or the first?
Those are all phase 1 numbers.
Just phase 1?
Yeah. So I will give both, and we have priced both for the purposes of today's update. And I know the more pressing questions, I've kept it to phase 1 because I really think that's the main driver for us in terms of what we're going to recommend. It's always a challenge with small municipalities with large urban growth boundaries and small populations when, as I'm sure Tracy will appreciate for North Middlesex and Park Hill, it was a similar situation where we actually recommended that they build a plant for the same capacity that they had. And our issue in that case was that we didn't think the capacity was real. We thought it was a bit overstated because their pond was supposed to be able to hold so much water. We didn't think the number was really true. But then we had 3 times that number for ultimate build out and we focused mostly on what that first number would be. I would say that based on what I'm looking at, it's probably about, I would say about 2 to 2.5 times as much to do the ultimate. You have some sunk cost at the beginning, like if you're building some part of a tertiary treatment building, you might expand it, but building most of it is still going to cost you that money. Building your headworks building, which you're going to build for the full capacity anyway, is going to cost you, a good chunk of money to begin with. But we are deferring quite a lot right now in terms of, and one thing that we're deferring with the approach that we're having here is a lot of the tank construction, which is sort of the more complex concrete forming work isn't being done as part of this.
And I guess my other question was, out of the three concepts shown, obviously you have a preferred one, which makes sense to me. Which one is your preferred one? When it comes to construction, would that be realistically the one that would be able to be constructed in the shortest time frame?
I would say most likely yes. I think that we're probably, I would say that none of them are particularly onerous. The other two have basically tanks that need to be constructed in order for them to function. The extended air process, the new clarifiers that we're talking about are basically steel tanks. They're basically skids, but they're meant to be installed indoors. So we're showing a building that they're in. So obviously installing them is pretty easy. You have to have the building there and push them inside and then plumb them up. So in that sense, I think it's probably the fastest one to build. That being said, you still have lead time to buy things and tenders and that sort of thing. It may not make that much of a difference to do, but it's something that certainly could be looked at. And I can talk to the planning team and see sort of how constrained we will be in terms of what the EA says. Obviously, we'll say we should do this technology and this is your preferred direction, but we can be a little bit vague in terms of the language that's used to add some flexibility. I think most of what the EA is really doing is permitting you to add that capacity, not permitting. It's ideally not tying your hands to a specific design approach. And I've definitely seen times where we've modified what the EA has originally said was going to be done. That's not as big of a concern as not doing something like, say, Indigenous consultation or natural environment surveys, and then the ministry puts up a protest when you go to apply for your new permit.
Thank you.
Anything further? Just a question, Maram, on the timeline. I'm attending AMO the third week of August. We get a delegation with maybe multiple ministries. Would it be possible to have something in hand as far as our cost and a completed EA, or what could I expect by that time frame?
I think by that time you'd have all of our written deliverables. The only thing that might be ongoing at that time is if there's review period documentation. So it might not be. Actually, I'm just thinking out loud about how the EA review period works. I think it would already be out for public review at that point, so there wouldn't be anything that's confidential. So you could essentially take everything. It just might not be the approved EA that's sitting on record at that point.
Okay, no, I need something.
Yeah.
Thank you. One other comment or question. Phase one, while it's getting built, there would be no disruption to our current operations.
That's always a consideration. Any plant retrofit has that problem. And I would say no, and it really is up to the designer and ultimately the contractor to make that happen. But how we're envisioning this functioning, at least in terms of the preferred option, is probably fairly easy in the sense that we're switching over to a new tertiary process while one is already functioning. It's more challenging when you have to make a tank that's already doing something, do something else. But that's partly why you have parallel. You have two parallel tanks. If you need to take one down, you can. But no, I don't see a service disruption.
What other comment? I think we already shared with you our numbers. The month of March, I think we were 137% of capacity. Is that a red flag? I'd like you to comment on that. Where does that put us with the ministry?
I think it puts you in the ministry's crosshairs in terms of having an idea of what you're going to do about it. As far as getting in real trouble, you're meeting your effluent requirements, which is fundamentally what the ministry cares about. I think every year they'll see your annual report, and I'm sure there's feedback. I don't know if it's coming directly to staff or council, or maybe just to Archie. But it's, I'm sure they're commenting on the fact you've exceeded your ECA limits and that'll be of note to them. But really their main prerogative is to make sure everybody's moving forward. So the fact that we're finishing something and the fact that you're then, once it's done, going to commit to moving forward, doing something is really what they'll want to know.
Okay, thank you. Anything further from council? We really appreciate the update. It's on top of mind all the time, this thing. If we've got one issue in Dutton Dunwich, that's it. We have to solve the problem. So
Yeah.
stay at it, keep us in the loop, and give me something by the 3rd week of August, please.
Okay.
Okay.
Noted.
Thank you,
And
Brown.
thank you so much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure. Thanks.
Does anybody want a break at this time? I see nothing. It's pardon? I'm just want to march on a little bit. Okay. We'll do that. Item 9 is the drainage department to receive the engineer's report on the Gilroy drain. We have no one visiting. Okay. So I guess we've seen it. Resolution, please. Clerk Tara.
Moved by Drulard, seconded by Pemberton, that the council of the municipality of Dutton Dunwich receives the engineer's report for the Gilroy drain and instructs the clerk to notify everyone required to be notified under section 41 of the Drainage Act of its intention to proceed with this drain, and will hold a meeting to consider the report at their council meeting scheduled for June 14th, 2023 at approximately 5:15 p.m. All in favor? And that's carried.
Thank you. And we're on to correspondence. The Township of Armor, request for support regarding water aerodromes. Not on the top of our priorities, but any comments on that? Resolution, please, Clerk Tara.
Moved by Pemberton, seconded by Loveland, that the council of the municipality of Dutton Dunwich supports the resolution from the Township of Armor supporting efforts to raise awareness about loopholes in current regulations regarding water aerodromes that allow proponents to build massive docks and boathouses without municipal consultation, approval, or adherence to bylaws and regulations. And furthermore, council supports petition E4364, calling upon the Minister of Transportation to 1, request an amendment to the current regulation that water aerodromes follow the same requirements as land aerodromes, making it mandatory for proponents to consult with local authorities proper to construction of a dock or structure. And 2, request that it is written in the regulations that mixed-use docks and structure will not be protected under federal jurisdiction. And further, that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to Rob Flack, MPP, Karen Vecchio, MP, and the Township of Armor. All in favor? And that's carried.
Thank you. Item B is AMO, request for delegations and program update for 2023 at the AMO conference. As I mentioned, I will be attending. I'm looking for council direction on what delegations requested and what are the issues at hand. Number 1 on my list anyway, I thought I would approach finance this time on our funding requirements for the wastewater treatment plant. We've been to infrastructure a number of times. I mean, we could go there again, but I think it comes down to what do they foresee coming down the road as far as funding, green dollars, grant programs. So that was my suggestion. Does council have any other requests? I think we have till June 6th for delegation, something like that. So if you have something, get it to Tracy.
Yes, I think it's June 2nd, yeah.
June 2nd. Okay,
June
timeline's a little
2nd.
closer.
Yes, yes.
So we'll go with that. Clerk Tara, please.
Moved by Loveland, seconded by Dreyfus, that correspondence item 9B be received and staff proceed as directed by council. All in favor? That's carried.
Item C, Town of Fort Francis, resolution in response to the opioid crisis. Any comments on that? Clerk Tara, please.
Moved by Dreyfus, seconded by Pemberton, that the council of the municipality of Dutton Dunwich supports the resolution from the town of Fort Francis advocating for additional resources to combat the opioid crisis, and that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to Rob Black, MPP, Aaron Vecchio, MP, and the town of Fort Francis. All in favor? And that's carried.
Thank you. Municipality of Tweed, a Bell Hydro Infrastructure. Any comments or questions? It makes sense. Clerk Tara, please.
Moved by Pemberton, seconded by Droulard, that the council of the municipality of Dutton Dunwich supports the resolution of the municipality of Tweed calling on the province of Ontario to facilitate, coordinate, and regulate pole deployment measures across the province of Ontario to prevent unnecessary duplication of pole infrastructure, and that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to Rob Flack, MPP, Karen Vecchio, MP, and the municipality of Tweed. All in favor? And that's carried.
Thank you. St. Mary's Catholic School, a request for in-kind Wizard of Oz production. I'm sure this will spark debate. Does council have any comments on this one? Councilor Dreyfus.
The only, I'll support it in this situation, but I just feel like we need to review the policy on just rental of buildings in general, because it seems to be happening a lot. So I don't necessarily have a problem. I just think we need to be a little more clear and more concise in direction. So, but it seems to be happening a lot. So, and I don't like putting staff in this situation where they have to come to council all the time. So.
You're right, it does happen quite often. Councilor.
And just a note on that, when we budget for these things, it is expensed back to council when we approve these things, so we do have to make the decisions on them, so.
And I think there was, as I read it, there was a fee for the weds and didn't realize that there was another fee that we charge. So anyway, I think we're ready for the resolution unless council wants to debate it further. Clerk Tara, please.
Moved by Droulard, seconded by Loveland, that the council of the municipality of Dutton Dunwich waives the rental for the St. Mary's Catholic School for their Wizard of Oz play in the Weds Theatre at the following dates in the amount of $452. Thursday, May 25th, 2023 from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Friday, May 26th, 2023 from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. Wednesday, May 31st, 2023 from 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. Thursday, June 1st, 2023 from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. All in favor? And that's carried.
They'll need to know that right away, I guess, or. Okay, is there another resolution for the?
Moved by Loveland, seconded by Pemberton, that relevant correspondence was reviewed. All in favor? And that's carried.
Okay, the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to talk about any one of those topics? Councilor Dreyfus.
I'm assuming we're a member of we're a paying member of the multi-municipal wind turbine working group. And do we attend meetings?
We are a member. I believe the fee is $400.
Yep.
We've been a member for a couple of years. And I have been attending.
Okay, yeah.
I have not made every meeting. I missed a March one. They're held every couple of months and they're all virtual because this group is mostly up in Grey Bruce. And quite frankly, they're behind us in dealing with this. We've got our official plan, our separations and all that in place. They don't have that. I find it's not a good use of taxpayer money and it's not a good use of my time. So I have instructed Tara that do not pay this invoice for this year. I don't see the value in it. And it's another committee and they get quite lengthy at times.
Yeah, I was just gonna raise that concern. I just was wondering if there was value to it, just reading through the minutes and so on. The other part to that though is if we aren't, should we be concerned if we're not, is it something we should be, or should we still participate or not, is so that we're informed, but we're gonna be informed anyway, I guess, no matter how you look at it. So, okay, I'm fine with not paying. That would be my position, so.
I can say this with certainty. The rest of the group benefited from Dutton Dunwich's involvement more than we benefited from them. I think we helped them a lot. And Jamie Littlejohn was also a member for a while as well. We both attended. So he has not attended recently either. Okay, thank you. Anything else on the consent agenda? I see nothing. Clerk Tara, please.
Moved by Pemberton, seconded by Drewler, that the items on the consent agenda be approved. All in favor? That's carried.
Okay. Can I suggest we take a break at this point?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So you're almost 2 hours, so you need to get up. We will resume. Number 12 on the agenda is the clerk's report. Clerk Terry, you have 3 items. So go ahead.
Sure. So the first item is we've put together a terms of reference for the Cenotaph Committee. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Good. Okay,
Resolution?
please.
All right. Moved by Drulard, seconded by Dreyfus, that the Council of the Municipality of Dutton Dunwich receives the report of the clerk titled Cenotaph Committee Terms of Reference dated May 24th, 2023 for information, and that council approves the terms of reference for the Cenotaph Committee dated April 21st, 2023. All in favor? And that's carried.
And your electronic sign policy update. Go ahead, Clerk Terry.
So this was just to clarify a lot of things. We were having a lot of people come in and the previous policy just wasn't quite clear of whether we were going to include it on the sign or not. So I included both the proposed new one and the old one, so you guys could see the changes that we've made. Is there any questions on that?
That's one of them things that, don't have to come council with proper policy in place. Staff can deal with it. Clerk Terry, please, resolution.
Okay, moved by Dreyfus, seconded by Loveland, that the Council of the Municipality of Dutton Dunwich receives the report of the clerk titled Electronic Sign Policy Update dated May 24th, 2023 for information, and that council approves the amendments to the electronic sign policy A24, 2020. All in favor? And that's carried.
Thank you. And the strategic plan 2023-2026.
So you guys put together the strategic plan. We made one change as suggested by Councillor Dreyfus, and this is just our approval. Any questions, comments? Nope. Okay.
Go ahead.
Moved by Loveland, seconded by Drulard, that the Council of the Municipality of Dutton Dunwich receives the report of the clerk titled Strategic Plan 2023 to 2026 dated May 24th, 2023 for information, and that council adopts the 2023-2026 strategic plan for the municipality of Dutton Dunwich. All in favor? And that's carried.
Thank you. Number 13, lucky 13 is the CAO Treasurer's Report. All yours, Tracy.
Mr. Mayor, this is just the April 30th operational budget to actual. As usual, in my preamble, I do say that it's very hard to actually compare budgets when you split it evenly by 12, because obviously right now we're ramping up in the recreation departments, and things like winter control and everything are down. So, but overall, we're pretty much right on for April 30th. Is there any questions?
Anything from council? I have just one question. Is there anything on there keeping you up at night?
You know what keeps me up at night, but it seems like I'm the only one that's important to, so.
Thank you for that. And you're going to do a backup engineering services, planning and building.
Oh, I think we gotta do the resolution.
Oh, sorry. Resolution, please, Sheriff.
Moved by Drulard, seconded by Pemberton, that the Council of the Municipality of Dutton Dunwich receives the report of the CAO Treasurer titled April 30th Operational Budget to Actual dated May 24th, 2023 for information. All in favor? And that's carried.
Okay. Go ahead with B.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On March 22nd, Tracy, Jackie, Tara and I met, and we had a discussion on the shortened approval times for site plan approval, minor variances, those kind of things. And I had met earlier with a couple girls who were starting their own company. They're municipal engineers. Their whole career was with municipalities, so they've started their own business. I'm not looking to replace an engineer or hire an engineer. These be more like backup when Tracy needs information that maybe our staff is not really licensed to give. Maybe Spreet is just a little too busy. Obviously Spreet will always be our engineer, but these guys would be more of a backup for the planning and building department, just when we need, maybe when time is important or things like that. So just wanted to get council's thoughts on having these guys as a backup engineering company and yeah, welcome any questions.
Could you give me an example of like when you would need a backup plan?
More like with Tracy with site plan control, because you really do need an engineer to tell you, you know, your water capacity or wastewater capacity or help me out, Corey, you're a building person, like what other things would be?
One of the things we just talked about earlier was, for example, every now and again, your official plan, your zoning bylaw requires EISs, environmental impact studies. Typically, as building officials, we're the ones required to ask for them. We're not always the ones qualified to review them. Sometimes they're pretty simple and we feel comfortable reviewing them, but sometimes they get quite complex and it would be nice to have somebody else a little more qualified to review something like that. That's the only thing I can think of off the
Yeah.
top of my head for building department.
Yeah, that was Jackie's comment. There's sometimes lot grading and things that she's not licensed to give, or they're a little more, she could do it, but like you say, there's some that are more, a little more hairy or that she would want somebody to do or something,
Yeah.
something along those lines.
Let's just speed up the process.
Yeah, it was sometimes, yeah, sometimes there's a timeline, especially now with these new, the way they've shortened them. And then we have to start giving back money if we don't get them done in time. And as Tracy puts it, a lot of times she sends out an email and she gets crickets because she can't get a timely answer. So this would be more of a, just more of the planning and building side. It wouldn't be anywhere rains or wastewater or anything like that, but
Councillor Drulard.
Yeah, I'm just curious to know how often have we used this type of service in the past? And are we budgeting? Have we budgeted for this?
in the past, we used John Spreet, so he charges us. So, yeah, so this would be, we wouldn't be paying Spreet and Associates, we'd be paying these guys instead, so.
Okay, so that leads to my next question. What is the need to change if we've used Sprayton Associates? I'm just asking question.
Timeline, because we don't get the answers back quick enough for things like that.
Okay, so we've had a problem with Sprayton Associates. How come we're just learning of this now?
They're very busy and sometimes they don't get back to us on a timely basis, so, this is more about just an option that we thought we could go with, so, yeah.
Yeah, I guess my only question is it, you don't have the contract here, so my only question, is it a pay per use similar to what it would be for Spreets?
Yeah.
Like it's not
Yeah.
we're promising you so many hours a week or anything, it's just when we need you, we use you, and there would be an agreed amount
Yeah,
of per hour payment type deal.
exactly, yeah.
Mayor Loveland.
Corey kind of got my question ahead of me, but what is our hourly charge rate?
Theirs?
Yeah.
I haven't got that and that. Sorry, I haven't got that. That'd be something I would bring back. But I just want to get your thoughts on it before we went any further with reaching out to them and that kind of thing, so.
I think one of the issues here too, there's a time frame on these things now and we have to start giving fees back. So the thought was if we ever got into that predicament, we don't want to hand back any fees. If we were pressed for time and it's use of service only. So council can give that some consideration.
Yeah, I don't think there is ever any harm in having an alternative. It just, if it speeds the process up and it might even be a cost savings, you never know, so.
Okay, Tracy, where do you want to leave that? Do you want to come back to, oh, sorry, Councillor
Okay.
Drulard.
Can I speak? Thanks. I just see that the motion says that we're entering into an agreement, but I'd like to see an agreement before I would support entering into it, like, because I don't know if it's gonna cost us more or just for me, I feel more comfortable having all the information. Don't mind supporting it, not bad to have a backup. But having all the information before I would be able to.
Right, so the resolution is basic, sorry, it's basically for me to reach out to them and get some paperwork in order for us to bring back to
No,
council.
it
Yeah.
actually specifically
Yes,
says that,
and,
yeah.
and I'm explaining that
Yeah.
it's more to reach out.
But it specifically says that we're authorizing the agreement. Like, I'm reading it, it's right in front of me.
Tara, can you change that resolution to say that we reach out to start to get information with their agreements? If it's written wrong.
Okay, any other comments on that? We'll give Tara a few minutes to rework the resolution and then we'll put it in front of council. We'll just give you a few minutes. Resolution, please, Clerk Tara.
Moved by Pemberton, seconded by Dreyfus, that the council of the municipality of Dutton Dunwich receives the report of the CAO treasurer titled Backup Engineering Services, Planning and Building, dated May 24th, 2023 for information, and that staff reach out to Levy Incorporated for backup engineering services required by the planning and building departments. All in favor? And that's carried.
And item C, the CSX land lease agreement. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Please, Tracy.
so, we met with CSX regarding leasing the land for overflow parking that runs along Marsh Line. We received their standard agreement, and I'm recommending that we don't enter into it. It's quite in depth for us just to have overflow parking for the amount of times we would need it. It also adds a lot of liability to us because it's more land that we're responsible for, especially along those tracks with kids with ATVs and things. Yeah, so I'm recommending that we don't enter into this and we come up with some other solution for our overflow parking, but any questions on that or
Okay, any
discussion?
questions? Council? For Dreyfus.
Yeah, so this is along Marsh Line you're talking, or is it like, is it also on Curry on right along? the-
Sorry, both sides, yeah. along
Both
that,
sides, yeah.
Deputy Mayor Loveland.
I agree, it's way more than we anticipated. I guess we could send a letter back and saying we're not interested in signing that agreement. And we'd be prepared to sign something that's considerably less restrictive for us just to use it occasionally. I think that's what was originally talked to them. If we're cutting their grass for nothing and this is the way they want to do business, I think we should start sending them the bill again because we used to.
Just gonna say.
Tara and I had that discussion this afternoon too, that we're cutting their land for them, so.
Okay, good idea. Any further discussion on that?
I guess one more, not really on that, but I'll talk to Paul, I guess tomorrow morning, let him know that it's not going to be available. And he may want to put a few cars in the parking lot behind the doctor's office, but I don't think that's an issue. It's after hours, so.
I don't see it as being an issue at all. Okay, are we done with that one? Clerk Tara, please.
Moved by Dreyfus, seconded by Loveland, that the council of the municipality of Dutton Dunwich receives the report of the CAO treasurer titled CSX Land Lease Agreement Overflow Parking dated May 24th, 2023 for information, and that council does not enter into the land lease agreement with CSX for overflow parking. All in favor? And that's carried.
Thank you. And number 14, Deputy Mayor Loveland, you're going to give us a crap
Yeah,
hockey bill
Give
update.
you a very short verbal report. Last meeting of the arena board, we did form a committee to look at the arena and see what improvements need to be made. So that's, I guess they're working now. But the strange thing about this funding, it's backwards to any other grant we always got. You had to have a plan and you had to have, dates as when it's going to be completed. This craft money is coming before we even know where we're going. And there's no time frame as to how quick we got to spend that money. So I think the plans are right now that there'll be nothing spent this year and nothing next year. It'll probably be the year after before we actually do any work. Time we go through what we need, and so just kind of let everyone know that it's not going to be a strain on this year's budget and probably next year's either.
Thank you. Have they received the funds already?
I'm not 100% sure, but I would not be surprised they have, or they're forthcoming very shortly. They haven't finalized. I'm not aware of anything that's been finalized since then, other than that they did donate something to the food, to Daffodil here just lately. So.
Okay, thank you. 15, new business. Nothing from staff? Counselor Drulard.
Through you, Mayor Hans, I just wanted to bring something to the attention. I've been receiving a number of concerns because there's no evening swim lessons offered again, like quite a few calls, messages. I did pass it along to our recreation representative counselor, but I was told it is not a recreation committee concern. I feel it is a council concern because it involves our constituents who are bringing them forward. So I just like at some point somebody to address.
So we are reaching out to our neighboring municipalities to see how they're doing it. We are working with our lifeguards that we have because we all agree that they need to put some nighttime lessons in, but they were thinking that compared to what we've heard from other people, they have less people doing the lessons than what our lifeguards think they should have in the pool. So we are working with them and coming up with something. So I did right from the start say we need some nighttime lessons because this came up last year as well. So we are working with we have got calls for Southwest and for West Elgin to see what they're doing, and we can hopefully get that schedule changed and get some evening lessons going as well. So
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
so.
appreciate that because that I had written it down that's the frustration is that a lot of single parents or both parents working, and it would mean taking a week off of work to be able to provide their child swim lessons in their community. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Do we have the staff that will be able to cover that?
Well, we seem to have more lifeguards than the other municipalities, and they seem to be offering more time. So that's why we're gonna talk to them and see what their schedules are like and see.
Speaking with Charlotte today as well, we have 7 lifeguards and so it was a concern of mine as well, or brought to my attention by, some residents in the community. But we have 7 lifeguards, but none of the qualified ability is weak. So that's our problem is we've gone through COVID, there's less experience and more kids are coming back to work, but we still don't have the capabilities yet. So that could be part of the problem with the overall big picture of what's going on as well. So anyway, I'm glad to hear that we're working on it.
And I think too, like it's a scheduling thing. So if you've got kids who are qualified, but they're not maybe qualified to do the older ones,
Right.
then
That's what it is.
you distribute your lifeguards on their capabilities to teach these courses. So yeah, it's a bit more scheduling, but you got to make it work for sure, obviously.
Counselor Pemberton.
Yeah, and just because I was a lifeguard, typically you have an option. You can be a lifeguard or you can be a lifeguard instructor. It's not qualifications to teach younger groups, older groups.
Right.
You either have the qualifications or you don't.
Right.
So you might be able to be a lifeguard, which I was for years and
Do you want
you
to
to be a
try?
life, no. I have
Me
enough
too.
of those, thank you. But yeah, and I can see that being a problem where you couldn't take lessons for a lot of years. So now you've got qualified lifeguards, so you can open your pool, but you have one or two that might be qualified to do lessons.
Mm.
So that
So that's-
could be the major hurdle for that, and I understand, but so you can only offer what you're able to offer right now.
Right.
And just
Counselor Drew.
to comment on that. And perhaps again, we're back at that communication piece where if that is really the problem, then getting that information out to people would probably be in our best interest as a municipality and for our constituents.
Okay, everybody, Councillor Dreyfus.
Not in relation to this new business. This still on the lines of recreation. So I just want to inform council that we have this, that we did the surveys and we've assessed the surveys as a committee. And we're coming up with, basically a game plan for fall. And the programming, we're working on Canada Day and everything else right now. So I did want to inform the council that we will be publishing the results of the survey very soon. We weren't quite ready to do it yet until we did our full analysis, but that information is going to be going out to the public in a way that they can possibly understand the outcome of what we have discovered through the process. And the second part to that is I feel our committee is actually they're doing a great job and we've got a few new members on the committee again, which will spark some new ideas, which is a good thing in my opinion. So I'm pretty happy with where we are going with the recreation and what our plans are for the fall. So I think you can expect to see some changes and some life come back. Just give us a little bit more time and we'll get it figured out. So it's a slow process. I will admit that. So we are working with Charlotte's doing a great job. In my opinion, she's doing a great job. She's got a dual role with the municipality as well. So we have to respect that. And unless that changes, I think she's probably at her max at this point in time. So that's all I'll say on that part of it. The other part is the baseball. I'm just going to give you an update. We've had 2 meetings. Very positive, really good committee. We've applied for 2 grants so far. So that's well in motion. We've got our quotes in. So they're hard quotes that we can work with. We shot for the moon, but we'll just see where it goes. So the idea is just passing on to council that hockey is West Lorne's, soccer seems to be in West Lorne, and we're going to make every attempt to make baseball ours. And the Baseball Association is really hoping to create that atmosphere of Friday night baseball in Dutton. So we got a good youth group coming up and some young men playing baseball. So it should be a lot of fun for Dutton every Friday night. So that's where we are with that. So
That's great news. Thank you.
Yeah.
Could I ask you who's on the committee for the baseball expansion?
we have Linda Drummelsmith, Mary Jo Tate, myself, Dan Lundy and Gerald are on the committee as well. And I'm sorry, I just can't remember his name right off the. Oh, yes, yeah, sorry, I know him, but I just totally slipped my mind. Those were the ones that are working on it. So, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
great work.
And I got one more area of new business. Sorry, I'm going to load you up here. So, just kidding. We're looking at downtown improvements, and there's a short-term thing that I think we can fix that has been brought up by business owners on Main Street. And I'm wondering if possibly Tracy and Murray could look into this. There actually is a problem with parking on Main Street. A lot of the times it actually, when you look at it midday, that street gets pretty full. But when you look at the street, there's like 2 car lengths between each other and they don't, so is there a way we can put lines on the road so that we could give designated parking places to people? Like it's simple fix to me.
It's a county road, so we have to go to the county.
Is that possibility? We just couldn't sneak lines on the road. But no, it's something we could,
We could, we
It's-
could, we could reach out to
think it
the
would solve
county
a
and
lot of
see about having them
Yeah.
draw lines on there.
Let's take it further. Let's make a formal request to county. And county council, it'll be in front of them. To put parking markers on Curry Road in downtown Dutton. Hopefully that would solve the problem. And
yeah.
we have some very interesting drivers in the town of Dutton.
I always said that was the only place you can double park in front of the post office and come out and be blocked in.
Yeah, I've seen everything in the town of Dutton, believe me, with driving, so thank you for that. Yeah. If there's no other new business from council, I have one issue. And it's the PPS 2023. I've asked for Tracy's comments on it. I have some concerns with it. We have, I think, June 6th is the date to comment on this thing. So if I could ask council, direct your comments to Tracy or to Tara, to both, and we'll formulate them and we'll make sure that Dutton Dunwich is heard on this thing by June 6th, please. Councillor Dugard.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, are we including the concerns that are sent to us by email as well from residents?
Yeah, I mean, that's my point. I'm hearing about the rural lot creation, the three buildings. So my farmer friends are telling me about that. So that's good. And it's my concern as well. So yes, put those concerns together and we'll make a formal comment on the process from Dutton Dunwich. And the timeline's pretty close on this one too.
Yeah, I likely won't have anything to add that you don't already have. But I can send
I
it to you.
think we've probably all heard the same concerns. I find a paper copy better, so if anybody wants one, get one from the office. I ran out of ink trying to print the darn thing, so. Okay, we're done with new business. Announcements. Let's see, none. So we're up to closed. Tara, you fixed closed, please.
Moved by Loveland, seconded by Pemberton, that the council for the municipality of Dutton Dunwich now moves into a session of the meeting that shall be closed to the public at 7:33 PM in accordance with Section 239(2) of the Municipal Act, SO 2001, Chapter 25, for discussion of the following matters. A proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality, Section 2392C of the Municipal Act, surplus land disposal and acquisition. All in favor? And that's carried.
Okay, thank you. Let us know when we're ready. Good to go? Okay, we're down to the bylaws. Bylaw 2023-39 fees bylaw. Resolution, please, Clerk Tara.
Moved by Drulard, seconded by Dreyfus, that bylaw 2023-39, being a bylaw to establish various fees and tariffs for services provided by the municipality of Dutton Dunwich, be read a first, second, and third time and passed. All in favor? And that's carried.
And bylaw 2023-40 confirmed proceedings.
Moved by Dreyfus, seconded by Loveland, that bylaw 2023-40, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the municipal council of the municipality of Dutton Dunwich, be read a first, second, and third time and passed. All in favor? And that's carried.
And the dates are there for the next meetings. And There's nothing further. We will adjourn. Clerk Carol, please.
Moved by Loveland, seconded by Drulard, that the meeting of the Council of the Municipality of Dutton Dunwich closes at 7:46 PM. All in favor? And that's carried.
Thank you. A lot of information tonight. A lot to think about.